Hej, vi ska bjuda till hjärtligt välkommen till MFS. Vi har fått Pesta Garresen att presentera Fyrilestur Fyrokum till den och Petra är lättare av motormusiken.
Tack för det. Och det kom rätt städ. Men det är stort lätt att jag har spurt om att någon som börjar prata. Och jag vågar vinnas att Telduspøl Føroyum är också näkrånt och kring det sagt att det är så unga drang som typer sitt och bröder tröjorna. Nu skulle det vara lite Fyrilestur. Så det stiger mig också. Men så här var Sverige här utifrån det vill jag mot tredje mot Assam och det finns väl mycket hårt som framflyttning så jag undrar faktiskt. Då jag hade en hel attack att visa en utnärgrein som i annat inte är så tant för mig. Att här är några. Vi testar MFS i Fyrilestur till jag det stiger. Det huvudsättet är hej Justin Jensen så han kan skriva för relationer så han får skilja huvudparten. Men Mark Craig är renter och just nu fasen he was sedan 96 working in software development games. Jag har bara att säga att one of your games you were working with was 007 Bloodstain. And then when I combined these two, 007 and Craig, I thought, okay, maybe we should what they say you said I'll see James Bond shaken, not stirred. Okay. Welcome, Mark, and the stage is yours.
Hello. I'm start off by apologising for talking to you in English. I'm afraid my Faroese isn't really up to it, so I'll try and talk slowly, and hopefully you can understand what I'm saying. If you've got any questions, I'll answer them at the end, and if you need me to slow down, then put your hand up, and I'll slow down and try and be more clear. What I'm going to talk to you today is about being a programmer working on a AAA action game. Now, a AAA game is a games industry term for a game that's basically the top level of budget for a video game. So games like Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, Halo, Gears of War, they're all what we would call AAA games, which is the most expensive tier for a budget of a game. And the last AAA game I worked on was 007 Bloodstone, and I think the budget for that was about $30 million. So that's kind of the level of maybe a feature film, maybe a lower budget feature film, I should say. So I'm going to start off by introducing myself really and explain who I am and what I do. So at the moment, I'm one of the founders and I'm the programming director of Lucid Games. Now you probably haven't heard of Lucid Games because we set the company up about a year ago and we haven't published any games yet. But we were basically the senior members, some of the senior members of Bizarre Creations. And when Bizarre Creations got closed down, we sort of decided amongst ourselves to set up our own games company, which is what I've been doing for the last year. Now, before setting up Lucid Games, I worked at Bizarre Creations, and I worked there for 15 years, and my role there was a lead gameplay programmer. And I'll explain a bit more about that later on. The last game I worked on there, as I said before, was 007 Bloodstone, and before 007 Bloodstone, I worked on The Club. Now, I don't know if you played either of those games, but I'll show you some of the footage from Bloodstone and explain the role that I played on it, and also how we put the game together. Currently, because we're a much smaller company now than Bizarre Creations was, we're working on games for the iPhone, the iPad, Android, and various other handheld devices. The last thing I did was I released Fur Fighters on the iPad, which was a sort of a hobby project. It's a game that I worked on at Bizarre Creations about 10 years ago. We still had all the code and everything, so we decided to get it working on the iPad just sort of as a bit of a fun project to learn how to do games on the iPad and learn how to publish games as well. So basically this is what I'm going to be talking about today. I've decided to structure this talk in two parts. So the first part, I'm going to talk about how we did the programming on Bloodstone, how the team is structured and how the team works together. I'm going to explain each role of each programmer who worked on the game and how they work together. The second part, what I'm going to do is talk about a particular problem that we encountered that's fairly typical on working on a large game, the kind of problem that you have to solve. So I'm going to take you through that piece by piece. Right, so I'm going to talk to you about Bloodstone first, and just a general overview. But before I do that, what I'm going to do is to show you a bit of the game, just in case you haven't played it. And then I'm going to explain how we did each part of the game. Now, I took these videos off YouTube, so I apologise if they are a bit long, but they do. This particular video demonstrates nearly every aspect of the game.
This is urgent. Priority 1. We fear the attack may be imminent. How long until you're on the ground?
We should be there in 10 minutes.
We haven't got 10 minutes. The satellite is picking up suspicious activity near Greco's boat. We've got to get moving now.
I'm on my way. Change of plan. Head for the harbour.
Hostile radio chatter shows your landing has gone undetected. Blueprints show Greco's quarters are located on the lower deck. Find him and stop the attack on the G20.
I've loaded the video loop to the others.
Then get the job done. We're under our response. You should have been here by now. There's some kind of... I got Greg on the phone. But that is the one. You can't do this alone. Don't worry. Greco will take care of it. In the meantime, I want to get back to the news.
A third part failed to materialize. Perhaps this is a sign of the level of seriousness that ordinary people are taking.
Where am I heading on now? What?
Who the hell are you? Call off the attack, Greco. It's over. 1 man against 40. I don't think so. Guts! Deal with it! Stop it! We have to shut them down.
Last chance. Where is it? You're too late.
Okay, so everything that you saw and heard there had to be generated by the Xbox 360 in real time. So I'm going to try and explain how we went about writing the code that made all that appear on the screen and was interactable. So there were 6 main programming teams involved in creating the game. I'm going to go through each one in turn. And this is them now on the screen here. So we have the core technology team, the tools team, the audio team, multiplayer team, the user interface team, and then lastly the actual game programming team themselves. So the core technology team was basically a shared team at Bizarre Creations, and they worked on several projects. So while they were working on Bloodstone, they were also working on Blur, which is another game that we were doing at the same time. And basically what they do is they create a system that we can use to make our games. So they basically responsible for everything that's shared between the games, technology-wise, that we can use. So in order to create this technology framework, there were several roles involved really. So I'm just going to go through those. So firstly, we've got the application framework. Now this is basically the actual template that can be used to make any game. So what the team would do is they would make a sort of a fake game, a very simple game that we could then adapt and add things to make our particular game. And their framework would sort of use every single aspect of the technology as a demonstration of how we could use it in our own games. Then there was also the low-level systems. Now this is the very basic things such as loading files, reading the control pad, loading and saving data. And this is stuff that has to be written, and it has to be written in a way that will work on not only on the Xbox 360 but also on the PlayStation 3 and on the PC as well. So if we write a game that uses these systems, we don't need to worry about what system it's running on. We just need to write it for their system. And if we write it for their system, it should work on all the consoles. The next is one of the largest areas, I would say, for the technology team, and that's the graphics programming. Now, graphics is a very competitive subject in video games, and you've probably seen every time a new game comes out, it boasts to have better graphics than the game that was out last year. So we dedicate a lot of people to working on the graphics, and it's a very specialised area. So what they do is they make a system that can draw the basic environments and the characters in the game in the most realistic way possible, using the most cutting-edge lighting techniques. And also, it's very important they make it run as fast as possible. And on Blur and Bloodstone, we were aiming to go at 30 frames a second, which is the speed that television is. So it needs to look as realistic as television or film in terms of motion. Sort of connected to the graphics team is the animation team. Now this again is quite a large subject, because on a game like Bloodstone, as you saw before, there's a lot of animation in the game. There's lots of mini movies, there's lots of characters and lots of interactions, and there's things like the hand-to-hand combat and shooting and all that kind of thing that all has to be animated. And it gets animated in programs like Maya or through motion capture systems, and it's the responsibility of the animation programming team to make that data appear in the game and actually run in real time. The next team is the physics simulation team. Now this is something that a lot of companies, they don't actually have a team to do their physics. They will normally buy a physics system, because physics systems are very complicated and they all work in the same way really. So many companies use systems like Havoc. I don't know if you've heard of that, but there's also other systems that many games have in common, and I think often games that use Havoc have it written on the back of the box. Now we were fortunate that we had a very clever pair of programmers who could write a physics system for us instead of us having to use somebody else's. So this allowed them to make a physics system that was very specialised, that was so that we could use in our games, and it could be tailored to work with our games. And this was important for us because of the next thing I'm going to talk about next is the vehicle simulation. Now the vehicle simulation has always been very important for us as a company, because before we worked on Blur and Bloodstone at Bizarre, we worked on the Project Gotham games, and before the Project Gotham games we worked on MSR and various Formula 1 games. So we've always had a very strong sort of vehicle simulation background at Bazaar. So this was a continuation of the technology that had been developed for over 10 years. So it was very important that the vehicle simulation and the physics worked together very well. So this is one of the advantages of having our own physics team, is that they could work with the vehicle simulation team. And sometimes the same programmers worked on both systems to make sure that the simulation was as accurate as possible. Now, you probably saw in that video that there was a driving sequence at the end, and that was using our vehicle simulation technology. And that's the same technology that was used in Blur, and it was based on the technology that was used on the Project Gotham games. And because we had this shared resource, it meant that we could easily put driving in our James Bond game, which we felt was very important for a Bond game to have driving in it. And the last Bond game didn't have driving, and the company that did the last Bond game wanted us to help them out with the driving, but unfortunately we couldn't because of timing restrictions. But that's the core technology team. Now the next team is probably something that you probably don't hear about very often, simply because they work in the background and you don't see the direct results of their work in a game. But they are one of the most important assets of any games team. And what they do is they provide the tools that are used to generate the data that the game uses. Now this is very, very important because the game uses a huge amount of data. So there's graphics data, there's physics data, there's animation data, and there's also data that the game uses. So one of the key areas that they do is they create what we call the export pipeline, and that allows people to make environments and characters in modelling programs like Maya or 3ds Max, and to be able to actually run that in the game and transform the data into a format that the game uses, because the data format that Maya uses, for example, is designed for editing 3D environments. It's not designed for displaying them. So what they have to do is they have to transform that data into data that's more tuned to real-time display. Another area is the game database system. Now, the game has a database like many software packages and software programs, and everything from the levels in the game, the characters, how much damage bullets do, all that kind of thing, and also how the various parts of the game fit together. It all has to be set up in a database. It's not written in code, it's all entered into a database. And the game database system is the thing that holds that all together. So what they write is a database that's tuned, again, specifically to create data that the game can use easily and quickly. So we can't use something like SQL because that's just too slow. It's good for banks and things like that, but for games it's just not fast enough. So we have to create data that's very, very compact and very quick to access. And connected to that is the gameplay editor. Now, you saw the game before, and you could see James Bond walking through the environment, fighting people, having shootouts, breaking things, that sort of thing. Now, if we just created the environment in Maya, what it would be is it would just be a still level with no moving objects, no characters, nothing like that. So what we have to do is, when we've got the empty level, we need to actually put things in the game that the player can interact with. And that's what the gameplay editor does. It doesn't create physical environments, but what it does is it populates them, so we can place where we want the player to start, we can place where the bad guys are, we can place the movement paths that they take. We can also script events, and when you saw the movies, for example, of like James Bond fighting a man in the boat, that was something that was set up in the gameplay editor. And all the parts of that, the animation, the characters bursting through the doors, the cameras, everything was set up in the gameplay editor and sequenced together to run as a continuous experience. Lastly, we've got the debugging tools. Now, making a game like that is actually very complicated. There's lots of aspects to it. There's lots of people working on different areas. And because there's so much work going on and so many things involved, that things can go wrong all the time. So what we have to do is have lots of systems that can show us exactly what's happening behind the scenes, and we can use it to see, if something goes wrong, we can see what's gone wrong. We can do things like view the game in wireframe, so we can see if it's not. Sometimes things happen like the world gets loaded twice and it runs half the speed, and we don't know why it's doing that. So we need to use debugging tools to see exactly what's happening and why the game's running slowly, or if the game crashes, we need to see why it's crashed, or if something goes wrong, we can analyse what's happening and display it as it's happening. All these things get taken out of the game when it goes onto the disc. But before that, in the 2 years or so that we develop the game, they're always accessible and we can always use them to see what's happening in the game. And they're very, very important. So the next team I'm going to talk about is the audio team. Now the audio team is a self-contained team that are responsible for all the audio that happens in the game. So this ranges from the sound effects to the music and all that kind of stuff. The audio team consists of not just programmers but also sound designers and musicians as well. Although the musicians are usually contracted because we don't have need of musicians all the time. But what they do is they deliver the audio experience of the game, and they'll work with the game programmers so that, say for example, when you have the player firing their gun, the gameplay programmers will program the gun, but what they'll need to do is make it play a sound. So they'll tell the audio team how the gun works, and the audio team will then put the sound in. So when you pull the trigger on the gun, it makes the sound effect of the gun firing. When the bullet hits the wall, it makes the sound effect of the bullet hitting the wall. And if it shoots somebody, it makes the sound of them dying and hitting the floor. And at the same time, when things like that happen, and other events in the game, the music system needs to change the tone of the music. So rather than playing quiet music, it plays more exciting music when the player gets attacked or something like that. So there's lots of different parts of the game that the audio team have to hook into in order to play the right sounds and play the right music. So I didn't get a chance to demonstrate the multiplayer, but the multiplayer team is another quite large part of the production. Now, in Bloodstone, we had a multiplayer game which was separate from the main game, and the multiplayer team were entirely responsible for making that game work. So their roles range from writing the very low-level multiplayer technical code to actually implementing the game modes and the actual rules for the multiplayer games and how the multiplayer games work. And while the rest of the team were working on single player, the multiplayer team made the multiplayer game by themselves using some of the single player systems, and also writing their own systems for the multiplayer game modes. The network teams, the multiplayer teams, also shared with the other game teams in the company. So this team who were working on Bloodstone, they worked on the multiplayer modes on Blur as well, and some of the code that was used on Bloodstone was also used on Blur, but a very large amount of code had to be written especially for Bloodstone because it was a shooting multiplayer game, not a driving multiplayer game, so it had to be very different. Now this is a team that many people think their job's really simple and really easy, but it isn't. And what they do is they provide the user interface for the game. And when I say the user interface, what I mean is the menu systems that are used throughout the game and the general presentation that's all in 2D. So, for example, the overlays on the screen when it shows you how many bullets you've got, what your health is, any other information that needs to display while the game's running, they're responsible for, as well as when you pause the game, and also the main game menu system when the game starts. And they're kind of like a self-contained team, similar to the audio team, where they have designers who design the look of the user interface and programmers who will actually program in the behaviour of the user interface. And they were shared between our game and Blur as well, it was very difficult with this game because Blur was had a very complicated user interface, and our game not so complicated, but we didn't have as many resources because of the drain that Blur took on their team. So last but not least is the game programming team. So when all the systems that I've talked about before have been written, what we need to do then is to actually make the game. So this is a team of about 8 people, and this was the team that I was in charge of, where what we would do is we would work with the game designers who would design how they want the game to work, and we would basically do what the game design dictated, or in situations where the game design couldn't be achieved, we would have to talk to the game designers and tell them certain things were impossible and we had to change them in some way or another. So what the game programming team did was work through every aspect of the game design and implemented the various parts of it to make the actual game experience happen. Now, in some cases, the technology that the technology teams made didn't cover everything we needed. Now, one good example of this was in the video I showed you before. There's a boat chase. Now, there was no systems in the technology at all for boats because Blur didn't have boats in it, and we'd never done a game with boats in before, so we had nothing as far as boats are concerned. So we needed to write our own boat system. So one of our game programmers, he wrote a boat simulator that we used for the chase sequence that you saw in the beginning of the game there, in the video I showed you. Now, there are various aspects to the game programming team. I'm going to first talk about gameplay systems. Now, this was the main area that I worked on, which was, in order to make the game work, there needed to be a system that all the game code could run on top of. So what it would do is it would manage all the objects in the game, like the player, the bad guys, objects that you could break, things like the movie sequences and things like that. And it sort of gave a platform for the other programmers to work on top of. So, for example, the next role is the character system. Now, what the character system would do is use the gameplay system and build on top of that to make something that drove characters. And in the sequence you saw before, the character system was used for the player character, and it was also used for the bad guys as well. And they all used the same system. The way the character system worked is it was like a vehicle that you could drive. So the actual characters were like vehicles. And there were actually 3 ways of driving them. One of them was the player would control them using the joypad. So the player could take control of the main player character and use the joypad to control them. But also there was the artificial intelligence system, and for the bad guys it would control them instead of the player character controlling them with the joypad. There were also sequences where the characters, they didn't have anything making decisions at all. They were just being controlled by pre-scripted commands, and that was the third way of controlling them. So you could set up a script to say, okay, walk forwards 10 metres, turn left, walk forwards 3 metres, and they would follow that course of action, and nothing could stop them from doing that. They would just do what they were told to do. Now, connected to the player control system is the camera system. Now, this was mainly done by the people working on the player controls, because the camera is very close to the way the player controls work. And this is the camera that views your character when you're playing the game. So depending on what situation your character's in, the camera has to do something different. Say, for example, when Bond's ducking behind something, the camera moves into a different position to show that Bond's ducking, but also to show above the point that he's ducking, so you can see over where he's ducking behind, so you can jump out and attack people. The camera would also change for when Bond was fighting people, the hand-to-hand combat. And also, when you were aiming the gun, the camera would also change into a mode which worked better with aiming the gun and controlling the gun. So, the shooting control experience would work. So, I'm going to talk a bit more about the artificial intelligence. Now, this was a very big role, and we had a programmer who was almost solely dedicated to artificial intelligence programming. And this was basically setting up the bad guys so that they would present a challenge to the player when they were in the hand-to-hand or the shooting situations. Now, important thing to remember about artificial intelligence when you're doing a game is you mustn't design the artificial intelligence to be better than the player, because you're not trying to beat the player. What you're trying to do is to give the player an entertaining experience. So the artificial intelligence is designed around entertaining the player by providing a challenge, yes, but also providing sequences and ambushes and situations that can kind of be memorable and be an interesting experience rather than something that's just really difficult. Because it's very easy to write characters that will just shoot the player in the head at the first opportunity, but then the game won't be very enjoyable if you die as soon as you start playing it, because the AI is perfect. So there's a very important aspect of the artificial intelligence is to provide an entertaining experience for the player. Right, I'm going to talk about the next thing is the vehicles. Now, as I said before, the vehicles were based on the Blur vehicles, but as you may or may not know, Blur was a driving game. So the key behind Blur was to deliver a simulation experience. But with Bonds, the vehicles are not there for simulation. We don't want people to play the game and think about how accurate the cars are. We want them to have a sort of more of a roller coaster ride with the vehicles. So we had to adapt the vehicles quite a lot to make them easier to drive, so they wouldn't slide or slip or spin off the track like they do in a game like Gran Turismo. So the programmer who worked on the vehicles, he used the vehicle simulation code, but he adapted the vehicles so that they stuck to the track much easier. And he also worked on the artificial intelligence for the other cars, so the cars he was chasing, and also the traffic on the road and that sort of thing, to create a kind of the experience of a road full of cars, if you like. Right, okay, well that's the end of the first part, and I hope I've explained what everybody does. And I hope you've managed to follow me. I apologise for talking too quickly if that's what I've been doing. I'm going to now go into a little bit more detail into a specific part of the game that was quite a challenge for me and the other gameplay programmers. Now, I've worked on games for quite a while, and every game I've worked on, there's always been a part of the game, usually a level, that goes against the nature of how all the technology that I described previously has been developed. And Bloodstone had one of these levels as well, and that was the Akramaplan chase level. So, this was basically the design by the game designer, and this is what he talked to me about when the game was still being designed on paper. And what he wanted was a chase sequence where James Bond was travelling first on a hovercraft, and the hovercraft would be travelling down the riverbed at 200 kilometres per hour, chasing a Russian Ekranoplan vehicle. Now, I'm not sure if you know what an Ekranoplan is, but it's a crazy Russian ground effect vehicle that I think it was designed in the 80s as a sort of alternative boat. And it's like a plane that travels very, very close to the ground, and it uses a ground effect, pressure effect, to keep the plane just above the water. And it was supposed to be a very efficient way of actually travelling across water, but unfortunately it didn't really work because the water had to be completely flat, and as you probably know, water isn't always completely flat. But anyway, digressing a bit here, the idea behind this is that Bond is on a hovercraft, he's fighting people on the hovercraft, and then the hovercraft is at the same time it's chasing an Ekranoplan, and it gets to a point where Bond can jump from the hovercraft onto the Ekranoplan and then fight his way along the Ekranoplan to the command deck. Now, when the designer first talked to me about this, I just thought he was crazy, because doing something like that it's very difficult, because our technology was not designed to operate on fast-moving objects. Everything that we'd worked on before had always been stationary levels. So every level that we've had in other parts of the game has always been like like the boat at the beginning that you saw there, and also the car park area, and the hotel area as well, which is just a building that's stationary. Unfortunately, none of our technology for the physics, animation and character and AI systems was designed to run on anything that's moving. So to make the entire level run at 200 kilometers per hour with everything else running on it was going to be very, very difficult, and it would involve a very large amount of engineering time, because we'd have to adapt every system to be able to run on top of something that was moving. So faced with this particular problem, we had three options really. The first one was to, as I said before, to adapt our technical systems so they can cope with the moving game world. Now that would have involved a very large amount of work, because the physics system would have to be adapted, so would the artificial intelligence and the characters and all the systems like the player getting behind cover and anything involving interacting with the game world would need to be changed so that it worked with a moving game world. Second option, and this is something that happens quite a lot, is you just say, well, I'm sorry designer, I can't do that, we'll have to take that level out of the game. And this is something that nobody wants to do, and we didn't want to do it either, because it was a kind of a signature moment of the game. So there was a third option, which was to come up with an alternative plan for how to get around this problem but still deliver the experience of Bond being on the hovercraft and then going onto the Ekranoplan. So I'm going to talk about how I came up with an alternative plan. So the alternative, instead of moving the game world, is to move everything else. So we keep the game world still, and everything outside of the game world we move instead to make it look like the game world's moving. It's a similar technique to in the old movies when they had a scene on a train, and the train wouldn't move, it would be in the recording studio, but they'd have a film of the track going past that you'd see through the window, and it'd have people shaking the carriage to make it look like the carriage was moving. So I kind of thought we could try and get this working with the game. So what I did was I developed a system that created a series of moving world parts, which was the background of the river. So I had a series of pieces of the world moving very fast towards the camera, but keeping the hovercraft completely still, and having the actual pieces of the world move towards the camera and wobble, but making it look like the actual the hovercraft was moving instead. And as well as moving the world, I also moved the camera in a way that made it feel like the camera was actually stationary, but it wasn't, it was moving. Now I'm going to show you in a bit, I'm going to show you it running so you can get a better idea. But this system seemed to work. We did a few tests with very simple environments, and it worked. But there was one problem. Unfortunately, Bond has to jump from the hovercraft onto the ekranoplan. Now, when the game starts, you're on the hovercraft, and the hovercraft is stationary using the system, but there's an ekranoplan in the distance which is moving. So, what you've got to do at some point is you have to go onto the ekranoplan. Now, you can't do that if the ekranoplan's moving, because the system won't work, because it doesn't work, the technology won't work with moving objects. So, the second part of the level was still a problem. So, we had to come up with a solution to that, which kind of made the system a bit more complicated. So, the solution was to have two hovercrafts and two ekranoplans. We'd have a stationary hovercraft that you started off on, and we'd have a moving hovercraft. Now, we do the same with the ekranoplan as well. So when the level started, we'd have a stationary hovercraft and a moving ekranoplan. When we get to the point where Bond jumps, we switch off the hovercraft and switch off the moving ekranoplan, and quickly swap them with a stationary ekranoplan and a moving hovercraft. So at the point where Bond lands on the ekranoplan, it switched from a moving ekranoplan to a stationary one, and the hovercraft switches as well, so we can then have the hovercraft disappearing. And unfortunately, to do this switch, we couldn't do it seamlessly, so what we did was an old trick that lots of games use, where when we have a complicated transference, what we do is we mask it by playing a movie of the sequence we're trying to show on top of it instead. Now, because the movie was generated by the game, it didn't look out of place. It was the same level of graphical quality. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you a video of it working.
We've picked up Bond's signal. It looks like they're on Pomerov's tail. Acquiring visual now. Bond and Nicole are on an assault hovercraft with what appear to be multiple hostiles on board.
This is just the introduction sequence.
Picking up audio now. I'll patch it in.
I've got the throttle open on the way, but we're not catching up with him.
We're too heavy. I'm heading down to the hold. Maybe we can dump some cargo. All right, Nicole. Try and keep it steady. And keep the door locked. We're not alone.
Okay, will do.
So that's it. This is just a sequence that shows a cutscene version of the two models, but now we're going to go into the gameplay mode now. Bond is now playing on the stationary hovercraft, but you can see the background's moving. Well, it's not moving out of place. And because I made the camera move in the background, it feels as though the background is still, and the hovercraft is actually the thing that's moving. though you're inside the hovercraft, you still need to give the impression that the hovercraft's moving. So some of these vehicles were animated to wobble and move around. So you still got the effect of the movement, and the camera is still moving with the world as well. me a runner. And you can see the hovercraft, the moving hovercraft in the background now disappearing.
Change your plans. Tell me, Captain, are you sure your men can handle this?
Sorry, that's the next bit there. Okay, so that's it really. Hope you managed to follow me okay. And if you've got any questions, then now's the time to ask them.
How many people worked in the company?
The company was, I mean, that was on...
During this process you have described today?
For this game, I would say there were about 20 programmers and probably 80 artists, animators. There were a few people who didn't work full-time on the game. There were a few people who sort of helped out with various bits and pieces or worked on it for a few months and then worked on something else. But I would probably say there were over 100 people working full-time on the game.
For how long? For how long?
Took about, I think it was just over 2 years from start to finish. But when we first started working on the game, there was only a very small number of people. I think initially there were about 5 of us working on it at the beginning, just to draw up the plans and work out how we were going to put everything together. And then when more design decisions were made, we ramped up and we had more people working on it. And when we knew what environments we were going to build, then we had people come and work on the environments and on the characters and that sort of thing. So it kind of gradually ramped up, and I think at its peak we had over 100 people working on it. Anyone else?
You mentioned you were developing for the iOS platform.
Yeah.
Some might say that most of the games that are in the top 8 games, 1, 2, 3, 4, are relatively simple games, and some developers might even say that it's more in terms of luck to get your program, successfully in terms of financials.
Yeah, I think there's always a certain amount of luck with any game though, but I think with iOS more so. I think though one thing that's also been quite apparent now is that the iOS market is changing a bit and people do a lot more to promote iOS games now. And games like Where's My Water, for example, it wasn't luck that made that get into the top. That was being promoted very heavily by Disney and it had a lot of big people behind it. And there's also a trend for freemium games, which are games that are free. And then when you actually got the game and you're playing the game, then you will buy things in the game. Things like Smurf Village, that sort of thing. There's a trend for those now. And they kind of create their audience by being free and people will just try the game. So I think Angry Birds, for example, was definitely luck. And the company that did Angry Birds, they tried lots of games beforehand. And I also think that a lot of companies that were there first like Rovio, they reap the rewards later on because they knew how to make iOS games well. A lot of people were still learning.
Yeah, I heard that Angry Games took what, 60,000 euros or something like that to develop the first one, I mean that's a lot of money for a game of that success.
Yeah.
Have you experienced any of that yourself in your company?
Not really. I mean, as I said before, we've only just started out, so our main titles are not ready for release yet. And we are working with very big companies on one of our titles, so we will be getting a lot of promotion and that sort of thing. So we're kind of hoping that it will take off. But with all these things, we have to see.
What's the average salary for a programmer?
I think with programmers usually they start off quite a low salary typically. So a junior programmer will probably earn £20,000 a year starting off with. But with programmers, if you're good, your salary goes up very quickly. So people typically, they don't start off with a very high salary, but if you're very good, in 2 years you could double your salary quite easily, and a lot of people do. So it often depends on ability. Most people start on the same wage, but ability puts you higher when you prove yourself in a company that you work at.
Mark, I was wondering, when you started out your career, were you did you start at small, on your own? Or?
Yeah, well, I started Bizarre Creations as soon as I finished university, but while I was at university, I always made my own games. In fact, I think I've probably been making games since I was about 10 or something like that. But I didn't really publish anything until I started working at Bizarre. And when I started at Bizarre, there were about 12 people there, and when it got closed down, there were over 200 people. So it kind of changed quite a lot. And I think when we started, everybody was very small, a bit like how things are now with iOS developers. And then when things like PlayStation and PlayStation 2 came out, companies got bigger and bigger. So yeah, I think nearly every games company starts off very small, I would say. I can't think of one that started off with a huge number of people. Yeah.
Sorry, publishing. With a game like Bloodstone, you have to apply to publisher like Activision?
Yeah, the Activision funded and published Bloodstone.
Yeah, but how does it work with iOS? I mean, is there a fee you pay to the console manufacturer? Is there a quality assurance test?
So with iOS, in order to develop an iOS application, you need to, or you can, if you've got an Apple Mac, you can download their development system for free. So you can actually start without spending any money at all. But with the free version, you can't actually make the games run on a device. If you want to make your game that you've written run on your iPad or on your iPhone, then you'll need to pay the developer fee, which is about $100. And you pay $100 a year, but that's all you have to pay to publish a game. So what you can do then is you make your game, and when it's ready, what you do is you upload it to Apple. What Apple will do is they'll do a number of automated technical tests first, and then it gets put in a queue to be reviewed by like a person, and then I think they spend about 4 or 5 hours reviewing it. And typically it'll get passed, and unless you do something really wrong, often they check if you're not doing anything illegal with the actual device itself. They don't mind so much about quality. So when it gets approved, it goes on the store, and then any money you make, Apple will take 30%, and you have to pay every year. You have to renew your developer membership, or your application gets removed from the store. So you only really have to pay $100 a year and 30% of the money you make. But that might sound bad, 30%, but with an Xbox game, I would say a developer probably only keeps about 10 or 15%. I mean, the shop takes over 30% straight away with an Xbox 360 game, and then there's the distributors and the publishers and lots of other people. So I think for a small developer, the revenue is much better on iOS because it's only 30%. Yes?
Yes. What's the question? All right. You talked about the various departments you worked with.
Yeah.
Developing the game. But what about the legal department? What sort of interaction have you had?
Right. We didn't really have a legal department because that was the responsibility of the publishers. Yeah, so Activision would do the legal side. One thing that we did have to do is all our art assets, they all had to be approved by a legal team. So, you know, we didn't want to have any Coca-Cola logos or anything like that in the game because, you know, we'd obviously get sued for that. So a lot of things had to be approved by legal. There were various other things. Doing the James Bond game, there's lots of strange things we had to do, like Daniel Craig himself had to approve his realisation in the game, and you know, we had to keep sending him DVDs of movies of him in the game for him to approve it and that sort of thing, which took a long time. So that's a kind of a similar thing.
What about the Aston Martin?
Yeah, I think Aston Martin comes as part of the James Bond franchise. So I think the company Eon, who make the films, they have an agreement with Aston Martin that covers everything. So they'll say, okay, we want to use Aston Martin for Bond games and films and everything like that. And it's just a blanket agreement. So if we get approval of Eon, who are the company that own James Bond, then we get Aston Martin straight away. I think there are some things that we didn't get the theme tune. We had to pay extra for the theme tune because that's the rights to the theme tune are held by somebody else. I think that's the only thing that kind of comes outside of the James Bond license. Yes.
What sort of programs did you use? Like I did a game, we used Blender and Unity 3D,
okay.
and 3.
So, besides the tools and programs we wrote ourselves, the modelling of the environments was done on Maya, and characters were done on Maya as well. The animation, we used something called Motion Builder. Now, most of the animation in the game was actually motion capture. So we got the data from a motion capture studio, and then our animators, they had to process the data and clean it up, and then it then went through our tools to go into the game. So in terms of art tools, it was Maya and Motion Builder. We used things like Photoshop to make textures, and as far as programming is concerned, we used Visual Studio on the PC to develop the Xbox version, and then the PlayStation 3 tools that Sony provide also use Visual Studio as well. So all the programming was done in Visual Studio, and things like debuggers and things like that, we used Sony's tools for the PlayStation 3 and Microsoft's tools for the Xbox 360.
And something else about the options. Some developers always underdo the options. Sometimes the FOV is not in field of view.
Oh yes.
Yes. Why do developers underdo it?
Okay, well I can answer the one about field of view. The thing about the field of view is, if you specify a field of view, you basically specify the area in which you can see of the game world. Now the game is often very finely tuned to run at 30 frames per second. If I increase the field of vision, it would try to draw more things and it would create a bigger strain on the Xbox. So we couldn't guarantee, if we increase the field of view on the Xbox 360, we couldn't guarantee 30 frames per second. It also would mean that testing the game would be more difficult because they would have to test every single field of view option. PC is different. We probably didn't have options like that on the PC version, simply because it was a PC version of an Xbox game, and for every 20 copies you sell on the Xbox 360, you'll sell 1 copy on the PC. So a lot of the time we have to concentrate on the 360 version, just simply because we don't have the resources to put everything that everybody would want on a PC version that could justify the sales, if you see what I mean. So it is a kind of an engineering decision we have to make.
Did you lock it on 30 FPS on the PC?
I think we did, just because a lot of the timing in the game and the physics system, we had to make sure the frame rate was consistent. I mean, one thing that's quite important, which I guess we consider more important than a high frame rate, is a consistent frame rate. There are lots of times the game could run at 60 frames a second on the Xbox, but because of the type of game it is, it has lots of explosions and lots of things suddenly happening. We kind of have to allow it to be able to still run at 30 when there's lots of things happening, but keep it running at 30 when there's not much happening. So when Bond is just walking around, the game isn't doing very much, and we could easily run that at 60. But as soon as something happened, it would go down to 30, and that would create a bad experience for the user, because they would suddenly see the frame rate drop. Whereas if we kept it at 30, even though it could run at 60, it would be consistent, and it wouldn't be as jarring when big things happened in the game, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. Why I asked about the field of view is because some that I know, they get nausea.
Oh, yeah.
If it's only like 60, I think it's normal.
Right.
When it should be 90 when you sit there for PC.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I can't tell you off the top of my head what field of view we had. Another thing we do as well is, for some effects, we change the field of view. Like, for example, when the car's going really fast, if we narrow the field of view, things look faster. So we often vary the field of view for effects in the game, which would be more difficult to do if it was variable. Yes?
What is the driving force when you're developing a huge game?
Well, I think the thing is, for this game, what we wanted to do is we wanted to try and create the full Bond experience, having boats and cars and shooting and fighting. That was the real thing. We wanted to try and create a complete experience. That was our main aim. And of course, being games developers, we were all huge James Bond fans as well. So we'd always wanted to do a James Bond game. So we were kind of really glad that we were given the chance. So that was kind of a big driving force behind it as well. It's just a fact of working on a Bond game.
Well, wouldn't that make the game pretty much restricted as linear? Just scripted?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the kind of game that we were doing was fully intended to be a linear game where you go from A to B on every level. There are some points in the game where you can take alternative routes, but it's not. It was never designed to be a non-linear game. It was always supposed to be like more like a blockbuster film experience rather than, you know, something where you can choose your own way of playing it, like Deus Ex or something like that. It was always supposed to be a completely linear experience.
Follow-up question. Why don't you make a free world game like Minecraft, where people can create their own user experience? Why aren't you guys making those games compared to these blockbuster?
Well, it's mainly been about financing. The thing about Minecraft is Minecraft happened because somebody did it themselves as a hobby. If the guy who wrote Minecraft went to Activision with a document saying, I've got this idea for a game, and then showed Activision the graphics, a company like Activision would just laugh and say, you're having a joke, are you? There's no way we'd ever do a game like this. It's not like Call of Duty. Why are you coming here? So to create something that's really different, often you have to use your own money to fund it. Now, there are cases of games where people they've funded a demo of a game, that demonstrates what they're trying to do, and they've had funding after that. And in many ways, you could say Minecraft has been like that. They had funding to do an Xbox version, they had funding to do an iOS version after the original PC version was a success. But often it nearly always requires developers to actually go out on a limb and fund it themselves and be able to demonstrate it themselves to get funding. Either that, or it's a company that's had, they've got a really good reputation, they've done games for years, and there are cases of some companies, I think like Bungie, the game that they're working on now, they're allowed to do what they like, and they've got, because they've made so much money with the Halo games, they don't need to prove anything or prove any game ideas. I think they've been given a free rein.
Well, I was more thinking on the lines of user-created content, allowing people to create their own content in your game, in a framework in your game.
Yeah.
For example, like this StarCraft 2 maps, Warcraft 3 maps, where they can create their own custom experience within your framework.
Well, I think with games like that, primarily they're usually on the PC, and also it's a lot of it is about the graphical fidelity has an effect on this. Like, for example, the levels that I showed you, in order to make those levels appear in the game, we have to light them using our lighting tools, and it takes about 12 to 14 hours to light a level. So if we gave somebody a system to make their own levels for our game, they wouldn't want to wait 14 hours every time they created a level. You can't really do that sort of thing on consoles just because of the nature of them, and we were primarily a console developer. Yeah.
Well, why do you focus more on consoles than PC?
Well, Bizarre Creations was always a console company. As a developer, I prefer developing on consoles because console is a fixed target. You know exactly what electronics is underneath inside the case. You know exactly what you're aiming for. It's much easier to optimize the game and make it run how you want to on a console. I also like the way that when you play console games, I'm more of a console gamer as well. You just switch it on with the disc and you play the game. You don't have to install it or get the latest graphics drivers or all that kind of thing that you do on the PC. So I think there's kind of the two aspects to it really. And there's also the fact that there is financially consoles, they are more rewarding financially. Unless you have something incredibly successful like StarCraft or Diablo or World of Warcraft, most of the time, the PC games are only really a big success for small indie developers or companies like Blizzard who really know what they're doing. And there are less people buying games for PCs now than there were, say, 10 years ago. So financially speaking, it's much safer to target consoles. Plus, if you target an Xbox 360 and a PC, you can make a PC version because the PCs are more than capable of supporting a game that you can do on a 360 or a PS3. Yeah.
Are you planning to do anything on the Ouya?
Yes. Yeah. So the Ouya is a Android console, and I've actually backed it on Kickstarter. So hopefully I'll get my Ouya in March, and Fur Fighters, which is a game that I released on iOS, I've got a version working on Android, and I fully intend to get it working on Ouya and release it as soon as possible when the Ouya is working. But with all these things, I can imagine that it's not going to be ready on time, and it'll probably take them longer than they think, especially if it's the first time they've made something like that.
All those graphics, people making graphics, were they all located in the same region area, or were they outsourced in India? Same room? Or?
Well, most of I would say probably 80% of the people were working in the same office. In the room I was working with, we only had the gameplay programmers and all the designers and artists. So we all worked in the same room. The people who were working exclusively on the game worked in the same room. We did use a fair amount of outsourcing. We had a composer who did our music, who's a contractor, and he does music for loads of games, but most people who generate music for games, they don't work for a particular company because they're only needed for about 3 months of the entire game's development time. Certain art assets were outsourced, like various things like vehicles and objects and characters in the game. Our artists would generate concept drawings and we'd send them off to companies. I think we used companies in Vietnam and India for some of our outsourcing work. But I think quite a small percentage of artwork was outsourced. And then besides the artwork, there's also testing as well, which was done by our publisher. So they have a large number of testers. Although we had a small team of testers, Activision have got a huge team of testers that work 24 hours a day. So we used them to test the game in its final stages. Yep. So
what happened to Bizarre Creations?
So Bizarre Creations got closed by Activision because the thing about Activision is Activision, when they make games, they want games to sell like tens of millions of copies, like Call of Duty. And if they don't, then they're not particularly interested. So the problem we had was Blur, when that was released, it didn't sell as well as they were hoping it to sell. So, I mean, I don't think it sold particularly badly, but it wasn't Call of Duty for cars. And so, unfortunately, they decided that initially they wanted to get into the racing section, they wanted to make racing games, but then after Blur they kind of gave up, and because we were primarily a racing studio, they closed us down. And also I think it might have been something to do with us being in the UK as well, where all their studios were in America. It was more difficult for them to administer us over, in the US. Yes?
Should we hold up? Are you sure?
What kind of education or experience are you looking for in your program?
Well, programmers, I mean, one of the things that I did at Bizarre was, one of the other responsibilities I had was I interviewed programmers. So most of the programmers that we employed, I interviewed them at various stages. Typically we would look for somebody who had a degree in some kind of computer science. I mean, I've always favoured people with computer science degrees simply because I find that they tend to get a better education as far as programming is concerned. And also, if people want to make games, then they typically will make them in their spare time. They don't have to go on a course to make games, they will just do it. And so a lot of our programmers are people on computer science courses. We did have a fair amount of programmers who had been on physics courses and maths courses and things like that. Typically it was computer science. We did hire a fair few people who'd been on actual games programming courses, but I think the quality of the courses varied drastically. There were some courses which were very good, and we did get quite a few people off them, but there were some that were terrible, and I even interviewed a lecturer on a games programming course once, and he was one of the worst people I've ever interviewed. So, yeah.
When it comes to the gaming industry, what would you say is the difference between a software engineer and a software developer?
I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I think developing software requires engineering. I don't see why surely they're two different words for the same thing, really. I mean, I've got a degree in software development, and I've also studied software engineering, and I don't remember them being that different. I think the programming for games is definitely an engineering discipline. It does require an engineering mentality, and I think a lot of companies, they do call their programmers engineers instead of programmers, and sometimes it's easier to kind of think of them as engineers because it is often an engineering problem that you have to solve when you're making a game. Yes?
About multiplayer. How do you find if someone is hacking? Figure out if he's hacking or something.
Oh, you mean if they're hacking?
What?
You mean like one of our games?
Yeah, like artificial intelligence, like looking for heads, like straight up.
Well, hacking consoles is very difficult, and
you can hack.
Sorry?
But you can hack USBs. Something. I've never done it, but I've heard.
Yeah, to be honest with you, if somebody wants to hack anything I've made, then I don't mind at all. You can hack any game I've worked on, I don't mind. I think the responsibility, the thing that, I mean, piracy is a problem, and sometimes people hack the console systems so they can play games for free. As far as I'm concerned, that is the responsibility of the person who makes the console. I've worked on various games, but we put countermeasures in. But the thing is, in every case, it always takes more time to put the countermeasures in than it takes people to actually hack the game. So there's just no point in putting countermeasures in the game itself. I think sometimes for multiplayer games, people will check inconsistencies and have various checks and that kind of thing. And sometimes people would detect if a game's been hacked, but they won't do anything that's really obvious. Sometimes they'll put code in there that makes the game really difficult or something like that, so that people who've got a hacked version of the game have got a game where you can't do certain things or you can't get past a certain level. I remember one developer who wrote a game on the Amiga years ago, and he made if you'd hacked the game, he made a platform, I think a pixel too far away, so you could never jump to it, and you were supposed to jump to it to get to the next level. So anyone who hacked the game, they could never get past a certain point, and they didn't know why. But it was because he detected it, but he didn't put a big sign up saying, "You've hacked my game." He just moved his platform slightly to the left, and that's how he dealt with it.
Will you ever allow modding to happen on if you move to PC ever? Will you allow modding?
What, sorry?
Modding, where the player changes, makes stuff.
Oh yeah, modding. I think it depends on what kind of game. I think typically when people allow modding in their games, what they do is they write the tools that allow their game designers to make the game. And what they do is they just put the tools on the disk and allow the person who buys the game to install the tools as well. And I think depending on what sort of game it is, then I think that's generally a good idea, and it extends the life of the game and it makes people play it for longer, and that's a good thing. And it also encourages people to be creative, which is a very good thing, because we all need new creative people in the industry because we're not getting any younger. So it's good to have new people working there.
Sorry to interrupt. Maybe you to continue later. Thank you.
Okay.